When Samantha was small and I was about 4 months pregnant with Greer, my brother-in-law got married. He married this beautiful, brilliant, compassionate Korean-American woman. We occasionally got together for dinner, and they would keep Sam overnight. They kept her when we had our anniversary. We were invited to our family events. We got to know each other better and better. Then, after one family gathering, Howie's brother called and shared a number of things about which his new wife was unhappy concerning my behavior. It was devastating. I had no idea what I had done to be so offensive. They were matters that were out of my control, having to do with the needs of a toddler and the realities of being pregnant. And with a toddler, as well as food allergies and whatnot, I didn't know what I could have done to be so offensive to her, but they were still perceived as disrespectful to her and selfish. So every time I thought about it, right, I'd get this ache in my stomach, and my breath would go kind of shallow, and the thought of doing Thanksgiving with Howie's family, to me, it made me physically ill. And I had no idea how to fix it, to fix the relationship. Then 2 things happened. One, she got pregnant. And a friend of hers, after being told about her complaints against me, said, that sounds very Korean. That sounds very cultural. And so not long after these events, she called me up and apologized. She explained she had no idea how pregnancy affected you. And I was like, yeah. And explained this bit about the Korean culture. We cried, and I resolved to learn more about the Korean culture, and I'm so glad that I did, because now we're Korean. And also to be mindful of those traditions and characteristics. But now things are beautiful. It was as if my body was filled with helium. Such was the lightness and breath and spirit that materialized. When we've been harmed, or something occurs to injure a relationship, something happens. At a reminder or the hearing of the name, it begins in the middle and wraps around from behind and spreads out and takes its hooks and clenches down. The breath can go out and you can't quite fill your lungs to capacity, shoulders hunched to your ears. We embody shame. We make solid a hurtful word or unthinking remark or slight. Someone overlooking our humanity, the divinity. We solidify that pain in our gut and in our muscles and around the lungs, constrict the blood vessels, cutting off oxygen to the heart. The pain is real, and it does real damage. Jesus tells us in a parable about a landowner who forgives a slave who turns around and withholds this forgiveness for another. And he says, then this Lord summoned him and said to him, you wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you? He says to forgive from your heart, and not just once, not just 7, but 70 times 7. In the contested literal translation of that, it doesn't mean anything. It just means, or it doesn't matter, that is. It just means choose to forgive, choose it again, and again, and again, because we need to, and from your heart. Because at the end of the parable, the master, in in his anger, handed him over to be tortured. Jesus saying, so will God do to all of you who don't forgive from your heart. It's not that God does this directly. It is that God created us to be in right relationship with each other. And when we're not, we torture ourselves. We're left drowning in guilt, drowning in judgment, in judging and being judged. And unforgiveness limits God. It limits our life. Torturing ourselves as we step away from God's mirror, forgetting who we are as image bearers. How do we think about wrongdoings? Not just as when we were children, saying I'm sorry or having a time out, but to make the relationship right, to reconcile. Howard Zer, a Jewish rabbi, says this about it. Underlying this understanding of wrongdoing is an assumption about society. We are all interconnected. In the Hebrew scriptures, this is embedded in the concept of shalom. This is what shalom means. It's a vision of living in the sense of all rightness with each other, with the Creator, and with the environment. Many cultures have a word that represents this notion in centrality of this relationship, in relationships. So for the Maori, it is communicated by wakapapa. For the Navajo, it's hozo. For many Africans, the Bantu word Ubuntu, you've probably heard that before. For Tibetan Buddhists, it's tendro. Although the specific meanings of these words, they vary a little bit, they communicate a similar message. All things are connected to each other in a web of relationships. Nothing is done in isolation. Interrelationships imply mutual obligation and responsibilities. It emphasizes the importance of making amends or of putting things right. It's an obligation we have. While we might first emphasize the obligation owed to us by the one who has given us harm, the focus on interconnectedness opens up the possibility that others, especially in the larger community, may have obligations as well. We have obligations to each other, even when one person is harmed. Even more fundamentally, this view makes a priority of the healing of those involved. Not just saying I'm sorry. Those directly harmed, those who cause the harm, and their communities. Why do we hold on to our judgments and our resentments and our perceived hurts when it's causing physical deterioration, when it is literally breaking our hearts and breaking the heart of our community and breaking the heart of God? When God rescued Israel from Egypt, God threw the Egyptian army into a frenzy, it said at the beginning of the passage that was read. The Egyptian army was thrown into a frenzy as the people of Israel crossed the sea. A cloud of darkness separated them from each other so that Israel would have time to cross and to escape. This cloud of darkness that we often feel sometimes feels like a heavy pall around us, but it might actually be God's provision for us, holding back the real danger, our own frenzy of unforgiveness and shame, and giving us the space to see God as who God is, and to see me as myself, as I am. putting right, making things right, justice and righteousness. When you hear the word justice, this is what it all means, and all rightness. These are all ways to describe who God is. Who God is. God's creative intent. Everything about who God is relationship. Relationship among the persons of the Trinity, the Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer. Relationship among all who bear God's image and likeness. Relationship between creation and God. We are created for the sole purpose of being in right relationship with each other and with God. That's why we are created. That's our purpose. To be in right relationship with each other and with God. Love God with everything and love each other. Is it any wonder then that our very bodies suffer when we do not love each other? Paul said to the Romans, don't quarrel over the details that seem so important, but really, they aren't. Don't judge each other whether one holds to the rules that seem so important. Really, they're not. This is why Jesus lived and died and went to hell and back, lives again in a body that can move through doors, so that we can live in the body of Christ that can move mountains and through a virus, and can do this no matter how much money we have or how little we have. And maybe if we're all living in this way, forgiving each other, loving each other without judgment, we might do something different with our own money. But it always begins with me. Because more often than not, the first person that I need to forgive is myself. Anne Lamott said, forgiveness is giving up all hope of having had a better past. Isn't that a great quote? Forgiveness is giving up all hope of having a better past. You can't do anything about your past. Give it up. This means the harms that have been done to you, the harms you have done, all that you have left undone. Acknowledge these things. Sit with them. Welcome them as house guests in your soul, as Rilke eloquently describes, until they are ready to leave, and then cast them on the waters. When God rescued the people of Israel, God wasn't only rescuing them from this narcissistic Pharaoh. They stayed longer than they ought to have had in the land. They were first lulled by the lavishness of the place that Joseph's intervention brought about. They were comfortable then, and they forgot that they were a called people and to a prepared space. And God rescued them from themselves. God rescues us from ourselves. Next week begins Rosh Hashanah in the Jewish tradition, the Jewish New Year. It's a time of right-making, of making apologies, of letting go, of making intentions to live into the image and likeness we are created to be together.